Hey guys, I'm coming at you from a hotel in Pensacola. I'm in Pensacola for a couple days for a work thing. Um, let's talk about Jimbo Fisher. As it stands right now, we still have a coach employed, but there's a lot of the fan base have been talking about a lot of speculation, a lot of people throwing a lot of names out there, and um, some of the fan base has been bringing up Jimbo Fisher, and some are completely opposed to it. So, yeah, let's talk about the old coach. And I've thought of a few pros and cons to the situation, and I know that the ones that are really in favor of it, fully aware of the pros, and the people that are really against it are really opposed to the cons. But so I wanted to break down a few things and give you my take on that situation. Uh, I'll go ahead and say it right now. The easy part is to say that if my only two options were to keep Mike Norvell or bring Jimbo Fisher back, well, that's easy. I'd take Jimbo back in a heartbeat if that's my two options. Um, but okay, Jimbo Fisher, when he went to Texas A&M, uh, I'm not going to break down too much of what he did at Texas A&M because I didn't really pay attention to it. Um, Yeah, I just kind of looked the other way. If I saw some of the scores, especially if he lost, there might have been a little part of me that felt a little Schadenfreude over that. That was just kind of like, eh. But yeah, hey, I don't know. For some people, time heals all wounds. I look at things a little bit differently. I know a lot of people will never forgive Jimbo Fisher for the way that he left, and to some extent, I get it and I understand. But I do look at it a little bit differently. Uh, Hey, you can make the argument that every year him and Jimmy Sexton, we're trying to milk the university for bigger contracts and extensions, and yeah, they absolutely did that. Um, I mean, hey, it's a business. The guy's trying to get paid. Um, but I'm going to play devil's advocate in favor of Jimbo for just a moment, and I'm going to say that we were all familiar with his situation. Um, he had a lot of things going on in his personal life when he was in Tallahassee. Uh, you don't really have any control over that's going to affect a man for sure. Uh, you know, I think if anybody can put themselves into somebody else's shoes, uh, we all remember Jimbo had a young child with a rare illness. And if you're in a position where you can have access to the best medical care that you can possibly hope for, access to uh, medical research and experimental treatments, whatever, then most people are going to take that route. And if somebody comes along and offers you stupid money, generational wealth, especially in that circumstance where you can afford to take your child to whatever provider anywhere in the world, I mean, come on. But I get it, like people weren't happy with the way that he went about that. But I can also look at that and say, who among us hadn't ever let somebody down or handled things the wrong way or um, pretty much anybody, friends or family, somebody, we've all disappointed somebody or behaved or made a decision that probably didn't sit well with people that we actually do care about. You know, Jimbo's human. But I will say that one analogy that I don't like, and I wish people would stop using this, is when they try to say, well, your girlfriend left you, you don't take her back. Come on. Jimbo's not our girlfriend. We're not in a relationship with Jimbo. Uh, he had a job. He did a job. We allow for an emotional connection because he's a guy that we invited into our homes every weekend in the fall. We watched him. We watched his press conferences. We followed him, and you feel like you know him because you're so familiar with him. But we're all just faces in the crowd, right? He doesn't know the fans. Um, so where should the man's loyalties lie? Now, you can argue for the players, absolutely, but at the end of the day, it's going to be toward his family and providing for them. And anything outside of the players, that's your employers. And I don't think that Jimbo wished any ill toward most of the fan base. I know his last year was kind of going off the rails there, and he had a couple less than positive interactions. Uh, but for the most part, that wasn't his consideration. And I do think that he did feel some kind of emotional way about his decision when he left in regards to the players. But as for the administration, come on now. We're holding him to a different standard than most of us hold ourselves. If you're in a position and you have a terrible boss that you don't get along to, that's not providing you with what you feel like you need or ask for to do your job well, to succeed, um, do you stay in that job because your clients are awesome or your customers or whomever it might be, or even your subordinates? But if there's some real problems going on between you and your boss, your supervisor, whomever it may be, come on. Don't hold him to a different standard than you would hold yourself to. If you're in a position where you're not getting along with the person above you and this other employer comes along and they're offering you boatloads of guaranteed money, come on now. So that's what I want to say for Jimbo Fisher in his defense, not as an argument that Florida State should hire him back, but just any of this, oh, don't go back to your ex-girlfriend. Come on, that's not the situation. That's a terrible analogy. That's apples to oranges. If Florida State were to hire Jimbo Fisher back as head coach, I don't know. Let's look over some numbers here. And like I said, I can't get into detail on Jimbo's time at Texas A&M. I did not watch. All right. But I know that when Jimbo was coach, it was very rare that you felt embarrassed. Very rare that you suffered a blowout loss under Jimbo Fisher. Not saying it never happened. As a matter of fact, you could count blowout losses or embarrassment on one hand during his tenure at Florida State. They got pretty well blown out by Oklahoma in 2010. Their showing in the 2014 playoffs against Oregon was pretty terrible. We saw cracks among that season. It seemed like I remember every year that was stressful. Undefeated regular season, but man, they had to pull out some miracles. They lost so many players to the draft from the national championship team. Lost really, really bad to Louisville in 2016. And then in Fisher's last year, they got embarrassed pretty bad by Boston College and Clemson. At FSU, 10-plus win seasons were pretty much the standard under Fisher. And for all the time with Mike Norvell over the last 6 seasons, you hear about the climb, and now you hear about people wanting Jimbo Fisher back, and you're feeling nostalgic because you're remembering his first handful of years really was the climb. I mean, that was everybody talks about 2013 and even 2014, but Jimbo's early seasons were really good. They were a lot of fun. I had some great memories to that time. But Fisher at FSU, his first season, he was 10-4, then 9-4, 12-2, 14-0, 13-1, 10-3, 10-3, and then his last season that he didn't finish was 5-6. So his overall record was 83-23, and in ACC play he was 48-16. Now this is about as far as I'm going to get into his time at Texas A&M because, like I said, I did not watch. But he was 9-4, 8-5, 9-1. I just realized this must be that must be COVID year. Okay, 9-1, 8-4, 5-7, and 6-4. And his overall record there was 45-25. So yeah, it was a step down from his time at FSU. His record in SEC play was pretty mid, 27-21. Which brings me to the next point. Does that reflect Jimbo now? Would he be able to recapture his magic at FSU? I don't know. I'm going to say this. I actually looked up how many head coaches at the FBS level have left a school and then gone back. And I believe the count was there have been 19 instances where coaches have left and then at some time later come back as the head coach. And out of those 19 instances, only 4 showed improvement. So statistically, I don't know how much stock you put into that. Is that coincidence or is there some, I don't know what the circumstances were, but I think the 4 that outperformed themselves were 2 coaches at San Diego State, 1 at Oregon State, and I can't remember where the other one was. Somewhere else in the Pacific Northwest, I believe. But yeah, so historically, coaches that return to a program perform at least somewhat lower than their first tenure, and sometimes it's been a disaster. But yeah, there's been a handful of times where it was real close to their previous tenure, but maybe a little bit worse. So I don't know. Why is that? Is it because they're older? The game's changed a little bit between their first run and their second. That could be it. I don't know. I think about it like this, and wondering if somebody can recapture their magic like that. I wonder how much of that is circumstantial, because when you feel like you've got something to prove, man, that's a whole different story. But once you've already captured that, once you've already been to the highest highs, and Fisher got his ring, and also you've made more money than your great grandkids will ever be able to spend. When your great grandkids don't ever have to worry about where their next Ferrari's coming from or whatever, stupid money. I think a couple of things happen. For one, it goes to your head and you believe, I'm the expert now, nobody can tell me anything. And then there's another way to look at it, is that I think people lose their fire. And here's an analogy. When you think about aging musical artists, you ever been to a Metallica show? One of the biggest bands in the world. And that's I'm just using them for an example, but there's a bunch of similar examples that you could fill in the blank there. But if you ever go to a Metallica show, right? And they still sell out stadiums, it's just massive crowds. People still go. But you look around the crowd and you see the reaction to the songs that they recorded 35, 40 years ago, like old music, and that's it. Um, but you look around, they play something off their newest album, and people are, oh, okay. Or they play something from an album just 10 or 15 years ago. Oh, okay. But it's people that go crazy for the old stuff, right? And that I think that why is that? You know, is it because they had that fire? They were young, they weren't wealthy yet, they had something to prove. But I think something changes. Like, still mostly the same people. They record new music, and that's all right, but it doesn't hit like their earlier stuff. So just throwing that out there, I think it changes a person when you get really, really comfortable. There's very few people that can just maintain that kind of fire, especially with a lot of success. There's a reason why there's only one Nick Saban, you know. Um, and I honestly believe, I think that man hated to lose a game more than he liked winning that national championship. I honestly believe that. I think that man hated losing so much that he hated losing a football game more than he loved winning that national championship. You don't find that very often. Um, so we got a little history here on how well that usually plays out if a coach returns to their previous employer. And I don't know, it is a very different era now. Can Fisher thrive in this era? Uh, is he too big headed um, to realize maybe his offense is kind of dated now? Is he able to change things up? I know at Texas A&M, one of the few things I do know is he was forced, I think it was just in his last season, to hand off play calling duties and hire a real OC. And he hired Bobby Petrino, and I guess that didn't really make any difference. Um, so I wonder if somebody who, in their mind, is such an offensive genius, I wonder if in his mind that just galvanized. Well, bringing in somebody else to run the offense didn't make any difference. Um, I don't know, but Fisher, okay. Fisher has made a couple of statements recently, and this article from CBS Sports, I meant to write down the author's name, and I failed to do that. I'll try to put it in the description. But Fisher made a couple of statements very recently, and one of his statements that makes me think that he hasn't really learned much. And I have a couple different thoughts about this statement. I'll get to the other thought here in a moment. But he's talking about if he were to return to coaching, and he says, I want to coach somewhere that's committed to winning. Just make sure they give us the resources to be able to win. I know it's about money, but you've got to have the resources to put into the game to win and do it the right way. The grass is just as green everywhere. So, we've heard that for years and years from Jimbo, and he just left a place where he had every resource you could imagine. And, it was pretty much a failure there. He got fired. Didn't really accomplish anything at Texas A&M. Got two or three bowl wins, I believe, and that's about all he had to show for it. All that money. Yeah, it sounds like, to me, I read that and it sounds like he didn't really learn. For one thing, if Fisher wants to get back into coaching, he's not going to have the resources he had at Texas A&M. There is nowhere on planet Earth that would consider hiring him based off his time at Texas A&M that's in that same category when it comes to resources. Very few schools have those kind of resources. Very few. And none of them are hiring Jimbo Fisher based off his time at a similar school with similar resources. Where would that be? Texas, Notre Dame? I don't know. They're not hiring Jimbo Fisher. So he better be prepared to, if anybody hires him, it's going to be far limited resources compared to what he just had access to. That's just a fact. But the other thought that I had about that statement when I read that, it made me think, who's this directed at? You know, he's putting that out there for somebody. He's putting that out there for somebody in specific. Maybe it's a blanket statement. Maybe it's for anybody who would be considering to hire him, but I don't think so. I read that, and it sounded like he had a job in mind, and he's putting out, hey, I can do it. This is what I need. And I can't help but wonder, maybe I'm reading too much between the lines, but I can't help but wonder if that was directed at FSU. I have no doubt that he knows Mike is cooked, and he knows that his name has been thrown around in regards to FSU, at least by some of the fan base. I don't know how seriously by anybody that would be making any kind of decisions, but he knows his name is out there. And he also knows that, if I had to guess, I would say that just being talked about at FSU, that's probably the only high profile program that he has a chance at, if I had to guess. I've heard his name talked around about West Virginia. I've even heard him being mentioned for Virginia Tech. Have they hired a coach yet? I don't even know. But due to his complaints years and years ago, I can't help but wonder if this statement wasn't directed at Florida State, and it might have even been an acknowledgement, because I'm certain he knows that things are different at Florida State now. He knows that they have a serious athletic director. I don't know if he's the best or not. I know that some people have some criticism toward Michael Alford. But the school has shown in a lot of ways that they're willing to invest. So I don't know if that was in regards to that or not, but here's another thing that Fisher said that when I read it, it was a little curious to me. It was in the same article from CBS Sports, and Fisher was basically defending Mike Norvell, which I find that peculiar. I'm sorry, but I just find it peculiar. I think anybody else in the sports media knows what's up with Mike Norvell. Everybody sees it and knows there's no coming back from where he's at. But Fisher made it a point to defend him. So I'm going to read what all he had to say about that. He said, it's easy to point fingers when you're outside or try to assess things, but until you're inside, you never really know, because there are so many things that can affect how young men play, what goes on with the coaches. Sometimes you have a couple bad breaks and things don't go right, a few technical things, and all of a sudden your confidence goes. When those losing streaks happen, those coaches are still good coaches. Mike Norvell has had an undefeated season. He's coached great wherever he's been. Those players have won. They beat Alabama in a great game, so it's not like they can't play. But it's funny in sports how quickly it can turn from just a little bit of confidence, just a break here and there, and on your psyche. When those things happen, they can snowball the other way just as fast. I still think they have a good team, a good coach, and they'll get it right. Really, Jimbo? You really believe they're going to get it right? I don't buy that for 1 second. Not only do I not buy they're not going to get it right, I don't buy that Jimbo believes what he just said. And again, maybe I'm reading too much in between the lines, but when I read that reads to me like a guy that really wants a particular job, and doesn't want any part in being one of the folks throwing the person who currently holds that job under the bus. That's the way I take it. I think Jimbo Fisher is absolutely interested in returning to Florida State. Um, Whether they should or not, I don't know. I think that based off of his time at Texas A&M and everything that he had uh, access to regarding resources, and that was what he was able to produce, uh, something's wrong there. The magic's gone. Um, Maybe I'm wrong. How do I put it? I absolutely believe Jimbo Fisher is still a good coach. That doesn't go away. Uh, I have questions. How well can he thrive? Like, how much of his record was based off of the change in the system with NIL and everything? The man's always been able to recruit, but I don't know. Maybe if there's any Texas A&M fans that paid close attention, chime in the comments, please. I'd like to know, like, since you since you have that and every school faces it now, you can recruit players and then they transfer out regularly from every school. That's just everywhere. They go chasing money. They go chasing immediate play time. So how much did that affect Fisher? How did he do with the portal? I don't know, and I didn't look it up. Um, is it that? Is it that his scheme is dated? So yeah, I personally think there would be far too many questions for Jimbo Fisher. Not that he couldn't produce results. I absolutely believe he would produce an improvement at Florida State. He always had a tendency in most years, he'd still drop a weird loss every now and then. He'd drop one. I remember, I think it was 2011, I believe, dropping one to Virginia. He'd drop some to NC State or something like that. But it was never a streak, you know. It might be a one off, like, that's a weird loss. I'm ready that week. Um, but he'd deliver you a 10-win season, and he'd go beating up most of these ACC teams. Uh, I absolutely believe he would be a drastic improvement over Mike Norvell. But is he at a point now, today, in 2025 and in the future, that he can take a program where you want to go, get you into the playoffs, and maybe take it further than that? That should be the standard. Not that you're going to get that every year, but that should be what you absolutely strive for. Um, and I don't know that he's got that anymore. I don't know that he could do that in the current system. Um, if he's too hard headed. So here's where I think my take is different than a lot of fellow Seminoles. Is there's people that absolutely want him back, and there's people that say absolutely not. And my take is more like how I view most things in life. What are the details? What are the circumstances? I do believe that there is a possibility that there could be a circumstance somewhere in some parallel universe, um, where it could be the right deal. I don't think it's in this universe. I don't think that the two sides, being the school and Fisher, could come to those um, appropriate terms. Um, you know, if you were to offer Fisher and say, "Hey, we can pay you this much because you're still getting paid by Texas A&M, so we would start you at X amount with incentives based off if you do this, 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 or this, a short contract for a few years that can be revisited, and hey, if it works out well, you know, it can be revisited soon." I don't think he would agree to those terms. I don't think Jimmy Sexton, assuming that he's still Fisher's agent, which I imagine he is, I don't think they'd agree to that. I would also think that one of those terms would be We need you to be a CEO, head coach. Bring in a real offensive coordinator that's going to be calling plays. And again, he just had that experience with Bobby Petrino, and that didn't work out. So I feel like in his mind, it's probably more firm than ever that I'm the guy for calling plays and running the offense. So I just don't think that those terms would ever be met. And who knows what the results would be. If something was worked out for a short contract with, you know, the right pay, everything like that, hey, I'd be in favor of giving it a try on a short contract at the very least. At the very least, he'd be able to build the program back up with talent. I have no doubt about that. That's basically my take. I'm not opposed completely under the right circumstances, but I don't think those circumstances would ever come to fruition, if that makes sense. A lot's changed at Florida State since Fisher's last time here. Most of the board of trustees is there. I think they've still got 3 members of the board that were on when Fisher worked before. Everybody else is new, at least new to, they weren't on the board when Fisher was there. We've got a much better athletic director. Some people got some criticism, and that's fine, but whether there's criticism toward him or not, I think everybody would agree it's a light years better than Stan Wilcox. The boosters have been restructured. Fisher got his football-only facility that's just opening this week. They've had the stadium renovations. New school president. I mean, could Fisher thrive with all that? His last year or so were lacking, but I think that had a lot to do with personal stuff as well as his bosses. I don't know. I know this. I know, like I said, Jimbo Fisher's record while he was at Florida State was consistent, good, had a very high floor for sure. His record against his rivals, against UF, he was 6-1. Against Miami, he was 7-1. Against Clemson, he was 4-4. And that's when, Clemson was really, really good. So anyway, that's my take. But as of right now, we still have Mike Norvell as our head coach. So we have that to look forward to. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. If you're absolutely against Fisher, if you're absolutely want him back, or if you're like me and you're just somewhere in the middle, I'd love to hear your take. I appreciate you hanging out with me and watching, and I'll catch y'all next time.